Judge Anthony Trenga sat in his large office on the 5th floor of the Alexandria courthouse. The room was quiet except for the sound of his pen moving across paper. Sunlight came through the tall windows and made patterns on his wooden desk. On the wall hung his law degree, and many awards from his 30 years as a judge. He was known as a fair but tough judge in the Eastern District of Virginia. Today, Judge Trenga was working on a case that many people were talking about. It involved powerful business leaders who were accused of hiding money and not paying taxes. The case had been in the news for months. Everyone was waiting to see what Judge Trenga would decide. He looked at the stack of papers in front of him. The evidence included bank records, emails, and witness statements. The prosecutors said these documents proved the business leaders were guilty. But Judge Trenga had doubts. Some of the evidence seemed incomplete. Other parts didn't follow proper legal rules. After thinking for a long time, Judge Trenga made his decision. He would throw out the key financial records. Without those records, the case against the business leaders would be much weaker. He wrote his ruling carefully, explaining why the evidence could not be used. The court finds that these financial documents were obtained without proper authority, he wrote. Therefore, they cannot be admitted as evidence in this case. Judge Trenga felt sure he was making the right legal decision. But deep inside, a small voice warned him that this ruling would cause big problems. He ignored this feeling and signed the document. Later that afternoon, Judge Trenga called the lawyers from both sides to his courtroom. The room was packed with reporters and people who were interested in the case. The judge sat high on his bench, wearing his black robe. His face showed no emotion as he read his decision. The motion to suppress the financial evidence is granted, he announced. These records were not obtained following correct legal procedures. The defense lawyers smiled. The prosecutors looked shocked. Reporters rushed out to share the news. Judge Trenga stood up and went back to his office, not knowing that his decision had just started a chain of events that would destroy his life. In Tallahassee, Florida, Pam Bondi was working late in her office. The former Florida Attorney General now led a special team that looked into judges who might be doing wrong things. Her desk was covered with files, and her computer showed news about Judge Trenga's decision. "This doesn't make sense," Pam said to herself. She had been watching several strange rulings by different judges, but Judge Trenga's decision to throw out such important evidence seemed especially unusual. Pam opened a file on her computer marked Trenga. Inside were notes about other cases where the judge had made decisions that helped certain powerful people. Each case by itself didn't prove anything wrong. But when she looked at all the cases together, she saw a pattern that worried her. Her phone rang. It was David Miller, one of her best investigators. "Did you see Trenga's ruling?" he asked. "I'm looking at it now," Pam answered. "What do you think?" "It's strange timing," David said. 3 days after he met with that businessman at the Capitol, Grill, the same businessman whose company would have been hurt by those financial records. Pam sat up straight. "You're sure about that meeting?" "We have pictures," David said. They talked for almost 2 hours. Pam's mind was racing. Judges weren't supposed to have private meetings with people involved in their cases. If Judge Trenga had met with someone connected to the case and then made a ruling that helped them, that was a serious problem. "Let's look deeper," she told David. "I want to know everything about Judge Trenga. His finances, his friends, his rulings over the last 5 years. If there's something wrong going on, we need to find it." "I'll get the team started," David said. "This could be big." After hanging up, Pam stared out her window at the Tallahassee sunset. She had built her career on fighting corruption. She had been Florida's Attorney General and had worked on many important cases. Now, as head of the Judicial Integrity Task Force, she had the power to investigate judges who might be breaking the law or their ethical duties. If a federal judge like Anthony Trenga was making rulings based on improper influence, it would damage people's trust in the courts. Pam could not let that happen. She would follow the evidence wherever it led, even if it meant bringing down a powerful judge. Back in Virginia, Judge Trenga drove home feeling tired but satisfied. He lived in a beautiful house in McLean, a wealthy area outside Washington. The house had 5 bedrooms, a swimming pool, and was worth over $2 million. It was much more than most judges could afford on their salary. His wife Susan greeted him at the door. "How was your day?" she asked. "Fine," he said, not mentioning his big ruling. "Just the usual." Susan looked worried. "Someone called for you. They wouldn't say who they were, just that you would know what it was about. They said to check your private email." Judge Trenga felt his heart beat faster. "Thanks for telling me," he said, trying to sound normal. "Probably just court business." In his home office, he locked the door and opened his private email account. There was one new message with no subject line. The message was short. "Good decision today. The second payment has been made. Check your special account." Judge Trenga deleted the email. His hands were shaking. He opened a banking website and logged in with a username that wasn't his real name. The account showed a new deposit of $200,000. This was the second payment he had received. He hadn't started out wanting to be corrupt. It began 3 years ago when he had gambling debts he couldn't pay. A man approached him offering to help with his money problems. All the judge had to do was make certain rulings that would help the man's business friends. At first, the requests seemed small and didn't seem very wrong. But over time, the requests got bigger and the decisions harder to justify. Now, Judge Trenga was trapped. If he stopped doing what they wanted, they would expose him. He would lose his job, his reputation, and possibly go to jail. So he kept making the rulings they wanted, and they kept paying him. He didn't know that Pam Bondi was now investigating him. He didn't know that her team was already finding unusual patterns in his bank accounts. He didn't know that they had pictures of his secret meetings and copies of emails he thought were hidden. As Judge Trenga sat in his expensive house, he felt a sense of dread he couldn't explain. Something told him that his carefully built world was about to fall apart. But he pushed this feeling away, telling himself he was too careful to get caught. In her office, Pam Bondi added another document to her growing file on Judge Anthony Trenga. She would follow the evidence step by step. And if the evidence showed that the judge was corrupt, she would personally put him in jail, no matter how powerful he was. The pieces were coming together. Soon, Judge Trenga's world would collapse, and Pam Bondi would be the one to bring him down. 2 weeks after Judge Trenga's controversial ruling, Pam Bondi sat in a small conference room with her investigation team. The walls were covered with photos, timelines, and documents. In the center was a large picture of Judge Anthony Trenga. "What have we found so far?" Pam asked, looking at the 5 people around the table. David Miller, her lead investigator, stood up. "We've been following the money," he said. "Judge Trenga's official salary is $230,000 per year, but his lifestyle costs much more than that." David put some photos on the table. They showed Judge Trenga's large house, his new boat, and his vacation home in the mountains. "His wife doesn't work," David continued. "His kids go to expensive private schools. He belongs to 2 country clubs. He takes luxury vacations 3 times a year. We estimate he spends at least $600,000 annually." "So where is the extra money coming from?" Pam asked. Sarah Chen, the financial expert on the team, opened her laptop. "We found 6 bank accounts that we believe belong to Judge Trenga, though they're not in his name. They're hidden under shell companies and fake identities. In the last 3 years, these accounts have received about $1.8 million in deposits." Pam raised her eyebrows. "Can we prove these accounts are his?" "Yes," Sarah said. "He was careful, but he made mistakes. The accounts are accessed from his home IP address. The phone number for account recovery is his private cell phone, and we found emails linking him to these accounts." "Good work," Pam said. "Now we need to connect the money to his court decisions." Tom Jackson, another team member, put a stack of court documents on the table. "We've reviewed all of Trenga's major rulings from the past 3 years. In 14 cases, he made unusual decisions that helped certain companies or individuals. In 12 of those cases, money was deposited into his secret accounts within days of the ruling." "Which companies benefited from his rulings?" Pam asked. "Mostly businesses connected to the Clayton Group," Tom answered. It's a network of companies owned by Richard Clayton. He's made billions in real estate, tech, and energy. His companies have been investigated several times for fraud and tax evasion, but the cases always seem to disappear. And is Clayton connected to the current case where Trenga threw out the financial evidence, or Pam asked? Yes, Tom said. The financial records Trenga suppressed would have shown that Clayton's companies were hiding money in offshore accounts. Without those records, the prosecution's case is much weaker. Pam stood up and walked to the board covered with photos and documents. She pointed to a picture of Judge Trenga shaking hands with a tall, gray-haired man at what looked like a private party. Is this Clayton? She asked. Yes, David said. That picture was taken 6 months ago at a fundraiser. We also have evidence they've met privately at least 8 times in the past 2 years, usually at restaurants or private clubs where they thought no one would notice. Pam nodded slowly. So we have a federal judge living beyond his means with hidden bank accounts, receiving mysterious payments, making court decisions that help a powerful businessman, and meeting that businessman in secret. Exactly, David said. Classic judicial corruption. We also have something else, said Maria. Gonzalez, the newest member of the team. She put a small recorder on the table. This is from last week. Judge Trenga meeting with Clayton at the Madison Hotel. We had the room next door. She pressed play. The recording was a bit muffled, but the voices were clear enough. The tax evasion case is basically dead without those records, said a voice they recognized as Judge Trenga's. But I'm getting worried. People are asking questions about my decision. Don't worry about it, said another voice, presumably Clayton's. It was a completely legitimate ruling. And remember, we have the insurance policy. What do you mean? Trenga asked. If anyone looks too closely at you, we have evidence that can hurt them too. Many powerful people are part of our arrangement. They'll protect you because they have to protect themselves. I hope you're right, Trenga said, sounding nervous. This latest payment should be the last one. I've done everything you asked. For now, Clayton said. But our arrangement is ongoing. There will be other cases, other decisions needed. You're too valuable to us, Judge. The recording ended. The room was silent for a moment. This is the proof we needed, Pam said finally. We can now show that Judge Trenga is taking bribes to make specific rulings. This is enough for an arrest warrant. There's one more thing, Maria said. The insurance policy Clayton mentioned, we think it's blackmail material. Clayton probably has dirt on other judges, politicians, maybe even law enforcement officials. This could be bigger than just Trenga. Pam took a deep breath. Then we need to be extremely careful. From now on, only the people in this room know the details of this investigation. We don't know who else might be involved. She looked at each team member. I want constant surveillance on Trenga. I want every email, every phone call, every movement tracked. We need to build a case so strong that no one can stop it, no matter how powerful they are. The team nodded in agreement. When do we make the arrest? David asked. Soon, Pam said. But first I want to see if Trenga leads us to others. And we need to make sure our case is perfect. We're going after a federal judge. We won't get a second chance if we make mistakes. Across town, Judge Trenga sat in his chambers, reviewing cases for the next day. He looked tired. Dark circles had formed under his eyes, and his hands sometimes shook when he reached for his coffee. The phone on his desk rang. He answered it. Trenga here. We have a problem, Richard Clayton said without greeting. Someone is asking questions about our meetings. Judge Trenga felt his stomach tighten. What kind of questions? Who's asking? A woman has been talking to the staff at the Capitol Grill and the Madison Hotel, showing pictures of us, asking when we were there, what we discussed. Did anyone tell her anything? Trenga asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The staff is well paid to be discreet, Clayton said. But this woman seems persistent. One of my security people recognized her. It's Pam Bondi. The former Florida Attorney General? Trenga felt the blood drain from his face. What is she doing investigating me? She leads some new task force on judicial integrity, Clayton said. But don't worry. I have friends who can shut this down. Just keep your mouth shut and deny everything. If she approaches you, After hanging up, Judge Trenga opened his desk drawer and took out a small flask of whiskey. His hands were shaking badly now as he poured some into his coffee cup. He had thought he was being so careful, meeting Clayton only in private places, using different names for his bank accounts, making his corrupt rulings look legitimate. But now Pam Bondi was investigating him, and Trenga knew her reputation. She was smart, determined, and honest. If she was looking into his meetings with Clayton, she might already know about the money. For the first time, Judge Trenga faced the real possibility that he might lose everything. His position, his reputation, his freedom. If the truth came out, he would go to prison. He thought about running, taking the money from his secret accounts and fleeing to a country with no extradition treaty. But that would mean leaving his family, admitting his guilt. No, he decided. He would stand his ground, deny everything. Clayton had promised to protect him. And who would believe Pam Bondi over a respected federal judge? What Judge Trenga didn't know was that at that very moment, Pam Bondi was meeting with federal prosecutors, showing them the evidence her team had gathered. And she was preparing to take the most dramatic step of her career, arresting a sitting federal judge for corruption. The morning of Judge Trenga's arrest began like any other day. He woke up at 6, showered, and put on one of his expensive suits. His wife Susan made him breakfast, but he barely touched it. His stomach was in knots. For weeks now, he had felt like someone was watching him. He kept seeing the same cars on his street. His phone sometimes made strange clicking sounds. "Are you feeling all right?" Susan asked, noticing how pale he looked. "Just a difficult case today," he lied. He hadn't told her anything about his problems. She didn't know about his secret meetings with Richard Clayton, the hidden bank accounts, or the bribes. She didn't know that their lifestyle was built on corruption. Judge Trenga kissed his wife goodbye and drove to the courthouse. Rain was falling, making the roads slick and the sky dark. It matched his mood perfectly. As he parked in his reserved spot, he noticed a black SUV pull in nearby. 2 men in suits got out but stayed by their vehicle watching him. Inside the courthouse, Judge Trenga nodded to the security guards and took the elevator to his chambers on the 5th floor. His assistant greeted him with a cup of coffee and his schedule for the day. "You have court at 9, she said. "The Wilson tax fraud case. All parties are ready." Judge Trenga nodded. The Wilson case was another one where Clayton had interests. Clayton wanted Wilson found not guilty, and Trenga was supposed to make sure that happened. But after his phone call with Clayton yesterday, Trenga wasn't sure what to do. If Pam Bondi was really investigating him, making another corrupt ruling would just give her more evidence. At 8:55, Judge Trenga put on his black robe and prepared to enter the courtroom. He looked at himself in the mirror. The face that looked back seemed older, with deep lines of worry. For a moment, he considered confessing everything. Maybe if he admitted what he had done and helped the authorities, they would be easier on him. But then he thought of the shame, the headlines, the look on his family's faces when they learned the truth. No, he would continue as planned. He would deny everything and hope that Clayton's friends could stop the investigation. Judge Trenga walked into the courtroom at exactly 9 o'clock. Everyone stood as he entered. He took his seat at the bench and looked out at the packed room. Lawyers, defendants, witnesses, and reporters filled every seat. It was a high-profile case, and everyone wanted to see what would happen. "Good morning," Judge Trenga said, trying to sound normal. "We're here in the case of United States versus Wilson. Are both sides ready to proceed?" The prosecutor stood up. "Yes, Your Honor. The government is ready." The defense attorney also stood. "Yes, Your Honor. The defense is ready." Judge Trenga was about to speak again when the main doors of the courtroom opened. Everyone turned to look. Pam Bondi walked in, followed by 6 federal agents in dark suits. They moved purposefully down the center aisle. Judge Trenga felt his heart start to race. He knew immediately why they were there. "Excuse me," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "There seems to be an interruption. We'll take a brief recess." "That won't be necessary, Your Honor," Pam Bondi said loudly as she reached the front of the courtroom. "I'm afraid court is adjourned for today." She held up an official document. I have here a federal warrant for the arrest of Anthony James, Trenga, on charges of judicial corruption, accepting bribes, money laundering, and racketeering. A shocked murmur ran through the courtroom. Reporters were already rushing out to call their newsrooms. The lawyers looked stunned. The court clerk dropped her pen. Judge Trenga gripped the edge of the bench. "This is outrageous," he said, trying to sound angry instead of terrified. "You cannot arrest a sitting federal judge in his own courtroom." Pam Bondi looked directly at him. "Actually, I can. No one is above the law, Judge Trenga. Not even you." She nodded to the federal agents, who moved toward the bench. "Anthony James, Trenga, please step down and place your hands behind your back." Judge Trenga looked frantically around the room. Where were Clayton's powerful friends? Where was the protection he had been promised? There was no help coming. Only faces filled with shock and disgust as they realized what was happening. Slowly, Judge Trenga stood up. His legs felt weak. The agents came up the steps to the bench, and one of them took his arm. "You have the right to remain silent," the agent said, beginning to read him his rights as they led him down from the bench. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As they put handcuffs on his wrists, Judge Trenga finally understood that his world was collapsing. Everything he had built, his career, his reputation, his life of wealth and privilege, was crumbling around him. Pam Bondi watched as the agents led Judge Trenga through the courtroom. The once powerful judge now looked small and old in his black robe, his head bowed in shame. This was the moment she had been working toward for months. A corrupt judge who had betrayed his oath and the public trust was finally facing justice. "Take off his robe," she said to the agents. "He doesn't deserve to wear it anymore." One of the agents carefully removed the black judicial robe, leaving Judge Trenga in his suit. The symbolism was clear to everyone watching. He was no longer a judge, just a criminal defendant like any other. As they led Judge Trenga out of the courtroom, reporters were waiting in the hallway with cameras and microphones. Flashes went off, temporarily blinding him. Questions were shouted from all directions. "Judge Trenga, did you take bribes to influence your rulings? How much money did you receive? Who else was involved in the corruption scheme?" Judge Trenga kept his head down and said nothing. The agents moved him quickly through the crowd toward the elevator. In the lobby of the courthouse, more reporters were waiting. So were court employees, lawyers, and members of the public. They all stopped to stare as the disgraced judge was led through the building where he had once ruled with authority. Outside, the rain was falling harder now. The agents guided Judge Trenga to a waiting car, shielding him from the cameras as best they could. But there was no hiding from the shame of this moment. As the car pulled away from the courthouse, Judge Trenga looked back at the building where he had worked for so many years. He had entered that morning as a respected federal judge. He was leaving as a criminal, headed for jail. In another car following behind, Pam Bondi made a phone call to her team. "Trenga is in custody," she said. "Now we move on to phase 2. "Are we going after Clayton next?" David asked. "Yes," Pam said. "And anyone else involved in this corruption scheme. We have Trenga's phones and computers. We'll check his house. Next. I want every piece of evidence, every connection, every dirty deal exposed." "Do you think Trenga will cooperate?" David asked. "Give us names?" "He might," Pam said. "Once he realizes how much trouble he's in. 20 years in federal prison is a long time for a man his age. If he helps us bring down bigger fish, we might be able to offer him some leniency." As both cars drove through the rainy streets, Judge Anthony Trenga's world continued to collapse. News of his arrest was already spreading across television, radio, and the internet. His wife would soon learn the truth about their lifestyle. His children would hear that their father was a criminal. His friends and colleagues would distance themselves from him, and Pam Bondi, the woman who had put him in jail, was just getting started. She had promised to clean up corruption in the justice system, and Judge Trenga was only the first step in her plan. The news of Judge Anthony Trenga's arrest spread quickly across the country. Every television channel showed the same images: the respected federal judge in handcuffs, being led out of his own courthouse. Newspapers used bold headlines: "Federal Judge arrested for corruption, and Pam Bondi brings down corrupt judge. Websites posted videos of the arrest that were watched millions of times. For Judge Trenga, the first night in jail was the worst experience of his life. He was placed in a special section away from other prisoners, but he still felt exposed and vulnerable. The cell was small and cold, with only a narrow bed, a toilet, and a small sink. The lights stayed on all night, making it impossible to sleep. The judge who had sent many people to prison was now a prisoner himself. In the morning, guards took him to his first court appearance. He wore an orange jumpsuit instead of his expensive suit. His hands and feet were chained. When he entered the courtroom, he saw his wife Susan sitting in the front row. Her face was pale and her eyes were red from crying. Next to her sat their son, Michael, who refused to look at his father. The hearing was quick. The charges were read: judicial corruption, accepting bribes, money laundering, and racketeering. If found guilty on all charges, Judge Trenga could face up to 30 years in prison. The prosecutor, a young woman who had once argued cases in Trenga's courtroom, asked that he be held without bail. "Your Honor," she said to the judge presiding over the hearing, "the defendant poses a serious flight risk. He has access to hidden bank accounts containing millions of dollars. He has connections to people who could help him flee the country. And he has shown a complete disregard for the law and his oath as a judge." Judge Trenga's lawyer argued for bail, saying his client had deep ties to the community and would surrender his passport. But the presiding judge agreed with the prosecutor. "Bail is denied," he announced. "The defendant will remain in custody until trial." As the guards led Judge Trenga back to jail, he passed by his wife. He tried to speak to her, but she turned away. His son stood up and walked out of the courtroom without a word. Judge Trenga realized that he had not only lost his freedom and his career, but he was also losing his family. Later that day, Pam Bondi held a press conference outside the Department of Justice building in Washington, D.C. Dozens of reporters gathered to hear her speak about the case that was now making headlines across the nation. "Today marks an important step in our fight against corruption in our justice system," Pam said, standing tall at the podium. "No one is above the law, especially those who have sworn to uphold it. Judge Anthony Trenga betrayed the public trust. He sold his position and his decisions to the highest bidder. He turned his courtroom into a marketplace where justice was for sale." Reporters shouted questions, and Pam pointed to one in the front row. "Ms. Bondi, what evidence do you have against Judge Trenga?" the reporter asked. "We have financial records showing that Judge Trenga received approximately $1.8 million in bribes over the past 3 years," Pam answered. "We have recordings of meetings between Judge Trenga and those who paid him. We have evidence linking these payments to specific rulings he made that benefited the people paying him. Our case is strong and clear." Another reporter raised her hand. "Are there other judges involved in this corruption scheme?" Pam's face became serious. "Our investigation is ongoing. I cannot comment on other potential targets at this time, but I promise you this. We will follow the evidence wherever it leads, no matter how powerful the people involved might be." The press conference continued for 30 minutes with Pam answering questions confidently. She had prepared for this moment for months, building a case that would stand up to the highest scrutiny. Judge Trenga's arrest was just the beginning of what she hoped would be a larger cleaning of corruption in the judicial system. After the press conference, Pam returned to her office where her team was waiting. They had been working around the clock since Trenga's arrest, searching his home, his office, and his electronic devices. "What have we found?" Pam asked as she sat down with her team. David Miller showed her a stack of files. "We found a hidden safe in Trenga's home office. Inside were records of all his dealings with Clayton. Names, dates, amounts paid, what ruling was expected in return. Trenga kept detailed notes of everything." "That's unusual for someone involved in corruption," Pam said. "Most criminals try not to leave paper trails." "It seems like Trenga was keeping the records as insurance," Sarah Chen explained. "There's a letter with the files saying that if anything happened to him, the records would be sent to the FBI. He was protecting himself against Clayton." "Smart move," Pam said. though not smart enough. What about Clayton? Any sign of him? He's gone, David said, shaking his head. Left the country on a private jet yesterday right after Trenga's arrest. Headed to his island in the Caribbean. No extradition treaty there. Pam frowned. That's disappointing, but not surprising. What about the other names in Trenga's records? There are 3 other judges mentioned, Maria Gonzalez said, putting photographs on the table. 2 state judges and 1 federal. All received payments from Clayton. And there are politicians too. 2 senators, 4 congressmen, and several state officials. Pam looked at the photographs, recognizing many of the faces. This is bigger than we thought. Clayton was building a network of influence, buying decisions at every level of government. What do we do now? David asked. Some of these people are very powerful. We do our job, Pam said firmly. We build cases against each, one of them just like we did with Trenga. We gather evidence, we make arrests, and we put them on trial. No one gets special treatment. While Pam and her team were planning their next moves, Judge Trenga sat alone in his cell. His lawyer had visited earlier, explaining that the prosecution had a very strong case against him. They had offered a deal. If Trenga cooperated fully, testifying against Clayton and the others involved, they would recommend a reduced sentence of 10 years instead of 30. Trenga thought about the offer. 10 years in prison still seemed like a lifetime to him. He was 62 years old. Even with good behavior and early release, he would be an old man when he got out. His career was over. His reputation was destroyed. His wife had filed for divorce and his children had stopped taking his calls. But what choice did he have? Fighting the charges would almost certainly end with a longer sentence. The evidence against him was overwhelming. And he was angry at Clayton for abandoning him, for running away while he faced the consequences alone. Trenga made his decision. He would cooperate. He would tell everything he knew about Clayton's corruption network. Maybe it wouldn't save him, but it might bring down the man who had corrupted him in the first place. As night fell on his second day in jail, Judge Anthony Trenga finally accepted that his world had completely collapsed. Everything he had worked for, everything he had been, was gone. The man who once sat in judgment of others was now being judged himself, and found guilty not just by the law, but by history, by his family, and by his own conscience. Meanwhile, Pam Bondi prepared for the next phase of her investigation. Judge Trenga was just the first domino to fall. Many more would follow. The corruption she had uncovered was like a disease in the justice system, and she was determined to cure it, no matter how painful the treatment might be. 6 months after Judge Anthony Trenga's arrest, the day of his sentencing finally arrived. The federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. was packed with reporters, legal experts, and curious members of the public. Everyone wanted to see the final chapter in the story of the corrupt judge whose world had collapsed. Judge Trenga had changed dramatically during his time in jail. His face was thinner, his hair grayer, and the confident look he once had was gone. He sat at the defendant's table, in a simple dark suit that seemed too big for his shrinking frame. His lawyer sat beside him, reviewing papers and whispering last-minute advice. On the other side of the courtroom, Pam Bondi sat with her team. The past 6 months had been incredibly busy for them. Following Judge Trenga's decision to cooperate, they had arrested 2 other corrupt judges, 6 politicians, and several businessmen connected to Richard Clayton. Clayton himself was still hiding on his private island, but international pressure was building to force his return to face justice. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Marion Coleman entered. She was known as a fair but tough judge, with a strong record of sentencing corrupt officials harshly. She took her seat and looked directly at Trenga. "The court will now pronounce sentence in the United States versus Anthony James Trenga," she announced. "Mr. Trenga, please rise." Judge Trenga stood slowly, his hands trembling slightly. This moment, more than any other, marked the complete collapse of his world. Whatever sentence he received today would define the rest of his life. "Mr. Trenga," Judge Coleman began, "you have pleaded guilty to judicial corruption, accepting bribes, money laundering, and racketeering. These are extremely serious crimes, made worse by the fact that you committed them while serving as a federal judge. You betrayed your oath, the public trust, and the principles of justice you were sworn to uphold. Judge Trenga looked down at the floor, unable to meet her eyes. The prosecution has recommended a reduced sentence of 10 years due to your cooperation in bringing other corrupt officials to justice. Your lawyer has argued for an even shorter sentence, citing your age and your previously clean record. Judge Coleman paused, looking at the papers in front of her. However, I cannot ignore the severity of your crimes. For nearly 3 years, you sold justice to the highest bidder. You used your position of power to enrich yourself. You damaged the public's faith in our courts and our legal system. The courtroom was completely silent as everyone waited for the sentence. Anthony James Trenga, I hereby sentence you to 15 years in federal prison followed by 5 years of supervised release. You are also ordered to pay a fine of $2 million and to forfeit all assets gained through your criminal activities. A murmur ran through the courtroom. The sentence was harsher than what the prosecution had recommended, but less than the maximum possible penalty. Judge Coleman continued, Mr. Trenga, you will begin serving your sentence immediately. You are no longer entitled to use the title of judge, and your license to practice law will be revoked. As the bailiffs approached to take him away, Judge Trenga turned to look at the courtroom one last time. His ex-wife Susan was not there. His children had not come. The only familiar faces were the reporters who had covered his case and Pam Bondi, the woman who had brought him down. After Trenga was led away, Pam Bondi held a brief press conference on the courthouse steps. Cameras flashed and microphones were thrust toward her as she spoke. Today's sentence sends a clear message that corruption in our justice system will not be tolerated, she said firmly. When those entrusted to uphold the law break it instead, they must face serious consequences. But our work is not done. We will continue to investigate and prosecute anyone who abuses their power, no matter who they are. A reporter raised his hand. Ms. Bondi, what about Richard Clayton? Will he ever face justice? Pam smiled confidently. We are working with international authorities to secure Mr. Clayton's return to the United States. I can't share details, but I believe he will soon join his corrupt partners in prison. Another reporter asked, how did Judge Trenga's cooperation help your investigation? His testimony was valuable, Pam answered. He provided names, dates, records of payments, and details about how the corruption worked. His information has already led to multiple arrests and will likely lead to more. After a few more questions, Pam ended the press conference and returned to her office. There, her team was already working on the next phase of their investigation. Maps, photos, and documents covered the walls, showing the expanding network of corruption they were uncovering. How did it go? David Miller asked as she entered. 15 years, Pam replied. Longer than we recommended, but fair given what he did. And how did Trenga take it? Sarah Chen asked. Like a man who has already lost everything, Pam said quietly. The sentence is almost secondary at this point. Tom Jackson looked up from his computer. I just got word from our international contacts. The government of St. Lucia has agreed to revoke Clayton's protected status. They'll help us bring him back to face charges. Pam smiled. Excellent. Prepare the extradition papers. I want to be ready to move as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Anthony Trenga was being processed for transfer to the federal prison, where he would serve his sentence. He changed from his suit into the standard prison uniform. Guards took his fingerprints, his photo, and his personal items. He was no longer Judge Trenga, just inmate 45873. As he was led to a transport van, Trenga thought about how completely his world had collapsed. Just 1 year ago, he had been one of the most powerful judges in the country. He had lived in a mansion, driven expensive cars, and enjoyed the respect of everyone around him. Now he had nothing. His wife had divorced him. His children had disowned him. His money had been confiscated, his reputation was destroyed, and he would spend the next 15 years in prison. The worst part was knowing that he had done this to himself. No one had forced him to take those first bribes from Richard Clayton. No one had made him corrupt his office and betray his oath. He had chosen money and power over integrity, and now he was paying the price. The prison that would be Trenga's home for the next 15 years was a medium security facility in Pennsylvania. It housed many white-collar criminals, including several former government officials. As Trenga was led to his cell, other inmates watched him with curiosity. They knew who he was. News of the corrupt judge had been all over television for months. Trenga's cell was small and plain with a narrow bed, a toilet, a sink, and a small desk. This would be his world now. No luxury, no comfort, no freedom. Just endless days of regret and shame. That night, as he lay on his thin mattress trying to sleep, Trenga wondered if anything good had come from his downfall. Perhaps his case would serve as a warning to other judges who might be tempted by corruption. Perhaps Pam Bondi's investigation would clean up the justice system and restore the public's trust. Perhaps something positive would emerge from the complete collapse of his world. In her apartment in Washington, Pam Bondi was also thinking about the case as she prepared for bed. She felt no joy in Trenga's punishment, only satisfaction that justice had been served. Her work was far from over. Richard Clayton would be next, and then all the others in his network of corruption. It would take time, but she was determined to follow through until every corrupt official was brought to justice. As both Trenga and Bondi closed their eyes that night, they represented two sides of the justice system, one who had betrayed it, and one who had fought to protect it. Trenga's world had collapsed, but from its ruins, a stronger, more honest system might eventually emerge.